I know that when we watch the news and we hear about all of the violence and war and all of the horrible things that we do to one another, that we can become very discouraged and hopeless about the state of the human race. However, just in our lifetimes alone, we have been witness to a great rising up of humanity. We have been witness to an ascension of human acceptance and awareness. For example, there are people in this room today who were alive during a time when black people in our country had to drink from separate water fountains and had to sit at the back of a bus. When I was a boy and I was bullied in school, my parents and my teachers said, "Boys will be boys, man up." Today, we do not accept this type of behavior anymore. And many of us remember that there was a time where you could smoke on airplanes and in restaurants, and cars didn't have seatbelts. We are growing in awareness just in our lifetime. And of course, all of us have seen in our lives such amazing strides that were made in civil rights and women's rights and gay rights. So when we're hopeless or discouraged, remember we are living at a time in human history of great spiritual awakening and awareness. We are rising in consciousness. And that is what today, Ascension Sunday, is all about. It is not just about the ascension of Jesus. Remember, for Jesus, it was never about him. He was never pointing the finger at himself. For Jesus, it was always about us. Today, we are celebrating our ascension. That's why, in the words of integration this morning, Richard Rohr says, everything that happens to Jesus must happen in our individual souls as well. But I don't think many Christians today really believe that or buy into that. They are Christians who say, well, Jesus is the only one that needed to go through that. And Jesus did that for me. So I don't need to do it for myself. All I need to do is to worship him because he did it for me. But Richard Rohr reminds us this morning, Jesus never, ever said, worship me, praise me. He never said that. He just said, follow me, which means do what I did and you will experience the ascension if you do what I did. And he says in today's gospel, you will be equipped with the power from on high. So, if Jesus was able to forgive people who wronged him, you have been equipped with the power to forgive people who wronged you. And yet we hear people say, well, I can forgive, but I'll never forget. If Jesus had the power to love everybody equally and unconditionally, then guess what? You have the power within you to do the same thing. And if Jesus had the power to work miracles of healing and abundance, guess what? You have the power within you to do the same thing. And if Jesus had the power to ascend from human consciousness to Christ consciousness, then so do you. That's why Jesus said, these are his own words, not mine. He said, all of the things that I have done, you can do these and greater. But I don't think we really believe that. Today on Ascension Sunday, we want to recognize and remind ourselves that that power is within us, and that the whole purpose of our being is to recognize that we have that power, that divine energy within us, and that our purpose is to make it manifest and to bring it to life. Now, the story of Jesus' ascension has been depicted in many famous works of art. And normally what we see in those works of art is that Jesus is floating up into the clouds, and the disciples are looking up in awe. Now, did that really happen? I mean, did Jesus really float into the clouds and disappear? I don't know. I wasn't there. I have no idea. But I've told you this before about the virgin birth and the physical resurrection of Jesus from the tomb. To me, it doesn't really matter whether these events were historically accurate or if they were myths. A myth is not a lie. It's actually just the opposite of a lie. A myth is a story that reveals the truth. So those stories are true. And the truth of the Ascension story is that Jesus was a human being, just like us, who, like Richard Rohr said, grew up in an ordinary life, just like us. But he was able to experience the divine that was within him, and he was able to bring it forth and to live this God consciousness. And he was saying that we could do it too. But many Christians think Jesus was the sole exception. He was the only person in history who could do this. But if they believe that, then they're not listening to the words of Jesus. Because he said, everything I've done, you can do. Now, there are millions of people of faith throughout the world for thousands of years who understand that there were other ascended masters other than Jesus. This is difficult for some Christians to wrap their minds around because we have been taught that Jesus was the only ascended one. But for thousands of years, millions of people of different faiths have their own ascended masters. Buddha, for example, thousands of people, for thousands of years, millions of people around the world see Buddha as their ascended one. During his lifetime, people noticed in Buddha this great light, like people noticed in Jesus. They saw someone so full of joy and bliss and a peace that surpassed all understanding. And they said to him, "Who are you? Are you a prophet? Are you a god?" And Buddha answered them and he said, "I'll tell you who I am. I am awake." And this is what Ascension Sunday is all about. Jesus is saying, awaken, rise up from your limited human consciousness. Many people on the planet today are asleep. They're going through the motions of life, but they're not awake. Many people are still operating from their animalistic nature. But as I said at the beginning of the homily, we are living in an extraordinary time where we're seeing this increased awareness and this raising of consciousness. It's an exciting time to live in. But we've got to get up the next rung on the ladder. And the next rung on the ladder is now rising from our humanity to our divinity. That's what we mean by the Ascension. Now, how do we rise in consciousness? How does this happen? Well, some of you may be familiar with the spiritual writer and teacher named Michael Bernard Beckwith. He's been on Oprah's show several times, and he's written some wonderful books. He explains it very simply. He says there are 4 stages of consciousness. The first stage of consciousness he calls the to-me stage. T-O, to-me. Which many people start off life thinking, everything's happening to me. Why is this happening to me? If only my father was different, I'd have a better life. If only I hadn't married that person and wasted all those years. If only the job market was better. Everything's happening to me. But then as we start to grow spiritually, we get to the next stage of consciousness, which is the by me stage. B-Y, by me. Which we realize that we can change things by changing our thoughts. Change your thoughts, change your life. If I start to be more grateful for things, I find more things to be grateful for. If I start to become more joyous, I get a life of joy. Many people in this room are at this stage of consciousness, and that's wonderful. But guess what? You're only halfway there. There's 2 more to go. The next stage of consciousness is called the through me state. This is where you crucify your ego. You die to your false self. You say, thy will be done, not my will. And you allow God to work through you. There are people in this room that I know are at this stage of consciousness, and you inspire me so much on my spiritual journey. Then there is the 4th stage. This is the stage of Jesus and Buddha. This is the as-me stage. God and I are one. You may say, well, that's just for special people. Do you really think God loved Jesus or Buddha or Mother Teresa or Gandhi more than God loves you? Their purpose for being is the same purpose of your being, which is to rise, to ascend, to go higher on the spiritual path. Now maybe you're not interested in that. That's why Richard Rohr says for many Christians, this life is just all about an evacuation plan for the next life. So it's, yeah, I'm going through life, going through the motions, there's good days and there's bad days, but I'm preparing for heaven. Jesus did ascend into heaven, but it wasn't in the clouds. Jesus never said heaven was in the clouds. What did Jesus say? Jesus said, the kingdom of heaven is within you. That's where he ascended. That's where he is, within you. That's why we have to be still and know that I am God. So today, on Ascension Sunday, that's what I want us to celebrate. I do want us to celebrate that Jesus ascended, but he wasn't the sole exception. I want us to celebrate our ascension. We are rising in consciousness. We are ascending. So let's celebrate that. And let's recognize that that divine dwelling space lives within each one of us and within all of creation. And as we start to recognize that and live more fully from that, we'll do what the disciples did in today's gospel. They were bursting with joy.